honor and privilege to be part of this, and thank you for starting this conversation. Clearly, we are at crossroads in South Africa and the world when it comes to how does business proceed. In the past, nobody batted an eyelid when somebody like Francis Drake was knighted for having looted as a pirate and given some of it to the Queen. And many really businesses were built on tears, sweat and blood, and it was seen as part of the law of the jungle. We've gotten to a point where global leaders think that what we've done has poisoned our ecosystems, socially, economically, and environmentally. And our global leaders think we cannot continue the way we are going. If we just come to South Africa, our business ecosystem is in one way experiencing the best of times and the worst of times. I'll start with the best of times because people in business like that. And from business, challenge means opportunity. Somebody is looking at what's broken and how can they fix it and make money in the process. So that's good, and that's how the world moves forward, by people seizing opportunities for themselves and for the rest of us. At the level of government, I know we talk too much about state capture and things like that, but to be honest, we're one of the most well-run countries in the world. We have a good constitution, we have good laws, we have relative respect for the rule of law, and I think we've gotten over the worst of state capture. We have a business literate president, and what I do like personally in terms of the best of times is also that we are returning to the culture of dialogue, and this country was built on dialogue. Yes, Prof Jansen, you said that we had no human rights, but we always had those conversations about human rights from the time of Pixley Kassem. And those conversations were not just they were not just the diplomacy of the oppressed. So back to where we are, the worst of times is we have huge unemployment. And the last time I checked, it was at about 27%. And if you add the needs, the picture gets even worse. And that is not in employment, education, or training. Youth unemployment makes it explosive because that's where the energy is, that's where the heart of a nation is, but also that's where the potential for development is. More than 50% young people are unemployed. If you break it by race, it gets worse. Poverty, 55.5%. If you break it by race, you will get, among those classified by law as Africans, 64.2%. And that's a recipe for disaster. But the question that we then have to ask is, why should business advance human rights? What's in it for business? But maybe as business you think, I don't care about injustice. Maybe the peace, the disruption of peace will catch up with me much later. And by the time it catches up, I would have moved to a different country. Well, the truth is no. There aren't different countries. We've become a global village. The shadow of the past is a very long shadow. It's not just apartheid oppression. It's not just colonialism or slavery. Everything we do everywhere else in the world eventually catches up with us because the world is a system. And like any system, what happens elsewhere in the system has an impact everywhere in that system. And therefore, what's in it for us, business, is that it's about improving our ecosystem. And if that's not good enough for you, and if it's too theoretical, let's look at South Africa scapegoating. We had a serious problem of state capture, which is grand corruption. It is people who throw in a javelin into the state, and within that state, then use that javelin to advance themselves in terms of state contracts, in terms of jobs within the state, licensing, but worse, to control the law enforcement system so that when accountability comes, that is going to be squashed. So we have these very complex conversations about what's right and what's wrong. But I think the human rights discourse is one place where we all need to pay a little bit more attention. When it comes to environment, people ask, why are people voting left? Why are people voting for environmental denialists? If somebody who was working in a coal mine in Witbank suddenly loses a job because we're going for green energy, and they ask us about their human rights, and our answer is green energy brings more jobs than coal jobs. But we don't ask which jobs, where, and we don't use our power and privilege to direct those jobs to where we are taking away. All I'm saying is, if we are going to get a handle on corruption, if we are going to consistently ensure that there's a rule of law, democracy, and sustainable peace, we'll have to get a handle on poverty, inequality, and equal enjoyment of all human rights and freedoms. I'm not the first to say this. After the First World War, they started this process that culminated in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948, because they realized that as long as there are some people who are left behind, those people will have no vested interest in the system. And more recently, the UN Global Compact under Kofi Annan brought together business, state, and society to have a compact that says, how do we create a world that works for all, where there's social mobility for all, and how does business play a role? And the UN Global Compact came back with 10 principles. 2 of those have to do with human rights. Principle 1 is business should support and research and respect the protection of internationally proclaimed human rights. And principle number 2 says make sure that they are not complicit in human rights abuses. Principle number 10 is extremely important. It's about corruption. Corruption is a gross violation of human rights. From where we are at the university, the law school at the University of Stellenbosch, we're joining hands with other universities and social justice facilities to say, let's rethink the economy and look at an economy that's not only obsessed with GDP, but that also looks at how is everyone doing? Because we know that with GDP, we could really say we're doing well when only 10% of us are doing well. And we're not saying get rid of GDP, we're just saying GDP plus. Lastly, we're working on something that is called a Musa Plan for Social Justice. It's like the post-World War II Marshall Plan. And I recently had a discussion with President de Klerk, who agrees with me that we should have had that Marshall Plan like that. Because, good people, apartheid left some of us in the valley and left some of us on top of the mountain. To say your free market says we're equal. If you're up in the mountain and in the valley, run as fast as you can, we'll finally arrive at the same destination, is a lie. But how do we reach everyone? The UN Sustainable Development Goals are saying let's leave no one behind. So how do we make sure we leave no one behind? Our own Equality Act was also suggesting we should leave no one behind. What we did was we threw away chapter 5 of the Equality Act and quickly inserted BEE. Chapter 5 of the Equality Act left everyone behind, and BEE collected some of us. But that has proven unsustainable. So thank you for this conversation, because I do believe that it's not just about a social fracture. When I attended some think tank in Austria very recently, Business in Europe was saying it's not just about social fracture, it's also about a sustainable business environment. It's also about a sustainable business ecosystem. Because when there's so much of a poverty scene, you don't even have a market. Forget about turbulence. Thank you.